Hi, my name is Jennifer. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to tell you what my predictions are for the Women's Prize Shortlist. So I'll link my video down below where I reacted to the Longlist books and talked about my reading plans for that long list. As it stands, I have read 4 of the long list. There are 16 books on the long list. So I've only read 4, and 2 of those books I had already read before the long list was even announced. I've DNF'd 6, and there's a further 6 which I haven't got my hands on yet. So what I thought I'd do is just run briefly through the ones I've read and what I thought of them. I'll talk about my DNFs and sort of a brief reason as to why I DNF those books, and then I will give you my predictions. So the first book that I want to talk about is Careless by Kirsty Capes. So I love this book. This is a book which I had not heard of before it made the long list. It follows a 15-year-old girl who becomes pregnant. This happens right at the start of the book, and then we sort of flip back in time and we see the period of time leading up to her becoming pregnant, her meeting this boy. We see her family situation. She lives with her foster parents and sister. There's a lot in the book about sort of growing up in the care system and what that means, and how and her relationship with her parents. She's been with these foster parents for something like 10 years. I should say it's set in the late 90s, and the author Kirsty Capes is care experienced herself, so she speaks from that personal perspective. I thought that was a really interesting exploration. I'm not sure that I've read anything quite like that before. The book does touch on a number of really quite dark themes as we go through. I think on Storygraph it's shelved as YA, and I don't know how it was marketed when it was released last year, but as I was reading it, it didn't occur to me that it was YA. To me, it didn't read like YA, but I don't know. But I thought it was really, really excellent. I thought the characters were really well developed. I particularly liked the friendship between the main character and her best friend. I thought that was really wonderfully written, and it's a book that I would definitely highly recommend, and I'm very, very pleased that I have read it. Okay, the next book is one that I had already read prior to the longest being announced, and that's The Sentence by Louise Erdrich. So this is mostly set in a bookstore, which I believe is based on a bookstore that the author owns in real life. Our main character is Indigenous American, and as are most of the main characters in the book, and she has recently been released from prison. She was in prison for a crime that she wasn't aware that she was committing. That happens right at the start of the book. So she's released from prison. She works in this bookstore, and this bookstore is being haunted by one of its previous customers who has passed away. So although it is a ghost story in the sense that it's a story with a ghost, it's not like a typical ghost story. It's not like sort of like a scary ghost story in that way. But we follow our main character, who is sort of trying to figure out why this customer is haunting the store, and in particular haunting her. The book is set from, I think it's November 2019 to November 2020, so it does take in the start of the COVID pandemic and also the murder of George Floyd and Black Lives Matter. I thought the way that those real life events were woven into the story and the discussions around those issues was really, really well done. There was a lot of reflections as well about what it's like for the main character being Indigenous American, and that's not something that I really have hardly any knowledge of at all, to be honest. So that was really interesting for me to try and sort of understand that a little bit better. The book fell down for me a little bit when we came to the resolution of some of the matters around the ghost and how things were resolved. For me, that didn't quite make sense. I found it a little bit confusing. That may have just been a personal thing, but overall I thought it was a good book. The next book I read was The Book of Form and Emptiness by Ruth Ezeki. This is my first time reading Ruth Ezeki. I really liked it. So we follow a young boy who is, I think, about 12 years old, and he is grieving the death of his father. His mother is sort of struggling, she's having problems with work, and she's a hoarder, and this young boy starts to hear voices, so inanimate objects will speak to him. The book has quite an interesting narrative voice, I thought. Most of the book is told from the voice of the book, and the book sort of narrates Benny, that's the main character's name, narrates Benny's story to us, but also to Benny himself. And then some sections, smaller sections, are told from Benny's point of view, and we get this interesting sort of dialogue between Benny and the book. Benny seeks solace in the library, and he meets some interesting characters there who he makes friends with. I thought it was a sensitive look at the experience of hearing voices. I mean, I don't know if it's something the author has experienced, so I don't know, and it's not something I've experienced myself, so I don't know, but it seemed like a sensitive portrayal to me in terms of how that was explored. That book for me was a little bit too long. I think it's maybe, is it like 500 pages? I could have done with it being maybe 100 pages shorter, but that's just like a personal preference. And then the fourth book that I have read from the Longlist is Great Circle by Maggie Shipstead. So I read this last year because it was shortlisted for last year's Booker Prize. So Great Circle is the story of an aspiring female aviator, and it basically tells her whole life story. And her ambitions and her relationships and family and da-da-da. I personally wasn't that keen on it, probably mostly because I'm not a fan of epic sweeping stories, and that's very much what Great Circle is. So for me it didn't quite work, but I recognise that it's just not my kind of thing. Then in terms of my DNFs, so This One Sky Day by LEONE Ross is a book that I DNF'd last year when I picked it up. It's published under the name Puppy Show in the USA, I believe, and it's set on the island of Puppy Show, and all of the inhabitants have a different sort of magical power. For me, the reason I DNF'd it was just because I just wasn't feeling it. I couldn't get into it. It was a book that for some time since I have thought maybe I should head back to. I haven't yet, and since hearing some people talk about it when they've been reading it for the long list, the reviews I've heard have generally been fairly underwhelming, so I'm not sure if it's a book I will head back to. Other DNFs, so The Paper Palace by Miranda Cowley Heller. The Paper Palace I read I think less than 30 pages, and it was a very personal thing for me. There was just something mentioned, events that had taken place in the past, which just made me not want to read on. So I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the book or anything like that, but it was just a personal thing. It made me not want to read on. I don't even know if those events were referenced again in the book further down. That may have been all it was, but for me it just made me not want to read on. Flamingo by Rachel Elliott, I also DNF'd. This one I really didn't read very much of, and I can't really tell you why, other than I just wasn't feeling it. Sorrow and Bliss by Meg Mason. So I think I read maybe 70 pages of this, and I did find it slow going, and I was kind of bored, but I have heard reviews of this since I DNF'd it, and people speak very, very highly of it. I think a lot of people really love the book, and it touches on mental health, and the glimpses of that I had in the short amount of pages that I read seemed to be a fair and decent portrayal of mental illness. However, I think that possibly it wasn't the right time for me to be reading that anyway. So it's a book that I feel like it's a book that I probably should like from what I've heard other people say. So I am thinking I may pick it up again at some point in future, but that's probably not going to be anytime soon. And again, that's just for personal reasons. Build Your House Around My Body by Violet Cooper Smith. Actually, that's here. I have decided to DNF it. I've read 260 odd pages, so I've got like 100 left to go, but I'm DNFing it. So this is a book which I'd actually ordered from the library before the long list was announced, because I thought it sounded interesting. And I mean, I read about 3/4 of it, so you know I was interested enough, but I felt like I was just too confused. So we've got two main narrative strands. So we've got one strand is set in 1986, where a teenage daughter has gone missing and then is changed by the experience. And then in 2011, we've got a young Vietnamese American woman who disappears. And so those two narrative strands mostly are focusing on the time leading up to those disappearances. And I think I could kind of follow those two strands okay. But then there were other bits as well that sort of like flip back in time, like 60 years before the disappearance. And I couldn't always follow the connection. And in the end, I just found myself getting a little bit like I wasn't enjoying it anymore, because I couldn't really follow what was going on. And then the final book that I DNF'd was The Island of Missing Trees by Elif Shafak. So I have read Elif Shafak before. I read 10 minutes 38 seconds in This Strange World and very much enjoyed it. The Island of Missing Trees is set between two timescales. So we have present day London, where we have a teenager whose mother and father are both originally from Cyprus, and then we get the backstory of them meeting and growing up in Cyprus. And then parts of the novel are told from the point of view of a fig tree. And this started off really well for me. Obviously Elif Shafak is a really great writer, there's no denying that. And I was really into it, but I just got annoyed by the fig tree in the end, because I felt like the metaphors of the fig tree and roots and so on and so forth, it was just a bit much. It was just too in your face, and that fig tree just really annoyed me. Like I don't mind weird sort of narrative viewpoints, and it wasn't the fact that it was from a fig tree's perspective that bothered me. It was just an annoying fig tree. So I DNF'd it. And then, so let me just run through quickly the books I haven't picked up. So The Final Revival of Opal and Nev by Dawnnie Walton. The reason I've not picked these up is because my library doesn't have them. I've heard most people's reviews of that one, I think, have been fairly underwhelming. Creatures of Passage by Maroa Yajide. I've not really heard many reviews of that. The Exhibitionist by Charlotte Mendelsohn. I am actually in the queue for that one from the library. I'm next in the queue, so hopefully in the next couple of weeks I'll be able to pick that one up. Remote Sympathy by Catherine Chidgey. Not really heard much about that. Salt Lick by Lulu Allison, same. And then The Bread the Devil Need by Lisa Allen Agostini. I've heard a couple of reviews and that sounds... I think people generally are getting on with that one. So, that's my long list overview. More DNFs than books read. Now it's time for my predictions. So, my predictions are like weighted towards the ones I've read and or DNF'd, because those are the ones I know about. First book on my predicted shortlist is the one that if I had to bet money on a book being on the shortlist, it would absolutely be this one, and it's Great Circle. I'm pretty sure Great Circle's going to be on the shortlist. I think it'll be a massive surprise if it's not on there, even though I didn't get on with it. Like, I think every other review I've heard has been overwhelmingly positive. Lots of people really, really love that book. Obviously, it was on the Booker shortlist, and yeah, it's gonna be on the shortlist. The next book I think is going to be on there is the Book of Form and Emptiness. It's a book I did enjoy, and I think it's an interesting book in terms of both its style, narrative voice and so on, but also in terms of its content and the sort of the themes and issues in there. Next book is the one that I most hope is going to be on the shortlist, and if it is not on the shortlist, I'll be very annoyed, and that is Careless. It's a remarkable book. I loved it, and I hope it makes a shortlist because it deserves it. But also, if it makes a shortlist, it means a lot more people are probably going to pick it up, and people should definitely read that book. Okay, my fourth book, I think, is going to be Sorrow and Bliss. As I say, even though I did DNF that book, the reviews I've heard from other people have really been very positive, and I think it does sound like a good book. It sounds like an interesting book. It sounds like it's strong in terms of how it explores the themes that are in there. So I think it's going to be on the shortlist. The fifth book that I think might be on the shortlist is The Sentence. I think it's an interesting book, and I particularly like the way that it weaves the real life events through there, looking at it through a different perspective, and I think that makes it a strong contender to be on the shortlist. And then the final book I think is going to be on the shortlist is The Island of Missing Trees. Even though me and that fig tree didn't get on, a lot of people do like the book. Elif Shafak is clearly a brilliant writer, there's no denying that. From what I understand of the book and from the little that I read, I think it explores some interesting themes and very sort of pertinent themes, and I think it's going to be on there. So that's my predictions. Great Circle, Book of Form and Emptiness, Careless, Sorrow and Bliss, The Sentence, and The Island of Missing Trees. We shall see what makes the shortlist. The shortlist is announced on the 27th of April. As I'm filming this, it is the 15th of April. So yeah, 27th of April. I'm very interested to see what makes the shortlist. I will, I think, probably do a video reacting to the actual shortlist. So let me know down below what you think of the long list, which ones have you read, which ones have you enjoyed or not got on with, and let me know what you think is going to be on the shortlist, because I would be very, very interested to know. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you are doing well, and I will speak to you again very soon. Bye.